Mars, once a 19th century fantasy of such authors as Jules Verne and H.G. Wells. Looking through a telescope, astronomer Percival Lowell swore he saw the canals of civilization. The fictions of Mars would inspire others to invent rocket science to help get them there. It would take a politician to make it happen.
The eyes of the world now look into space, to the moon, and to the planets beyond. Some would have us stay where we are a little longer, to rest, to wait. But this city of Houston, this state of Texas, this country of the United States was not built by those who waited and rested and wished to look behind them.
I could die on my way to Mars and feel like I had lived an entirely successful life, even if it were tomorrow.
I'm willing to do it. I'm willing to put my life on the line.
I'd go in a heartbeat if I was given the chance to go to Mars. Look, you know, life's risky. A few years ago, I'm sitting at a red light and somebody comes up from behind me and just rams right into my car, and if they'd hit a little harder, I would have broken my back.
The idea that one day I might be out there, you know, looking down on the earth from somewhere else. It's so amazing.
Many years ago, the great British explorer George Mallory, who was to die on Mount Everest, was asked why did he want to climb it. He said, because it is there. Well, space is there, and we're going to climb it.
Imagination, fantasy, and desire coalesced below the 1957 orbit of Russia's Sputnik satellite. Then political will shaped the nation's will as President Kennedy turned a nation's Cold War fears into a Jacob's ladder. And for the first time in the 4.5 billion year history of Earth, one of its species climbed out of the planet's protective and life-forming womb, looked up to the heavens, and took a step onto another world.
One small step for man.
One giant leap for mankind.
The moon and the planets are there, and new hopes for knowledge and peace are there. And therefore, as we set sail, we ask God's blessing on the most hazardous and dangerous and greatest adventure on which man has ever embarked.
By 1972, Kennedy's greatest adventure ended as the last of the great Apollo moonships made its final voyage. President Nixon saw our nation's focus shift from the skies to the Vietnam quagmire. The Apollo program was shut down and a planned expedition to Mars was scuttled. Over 30 years later, rocket scientists, poets, and scholars would look back at this moment not as a defeat, but as a clarion call to continue a species' courageous pioneering spirit.
It was, and not just the courage of the astronauts, but the courage of the nation, the courage of the political leadership to be able to take on an unprecedented challenge in no uncertain terms and say, I'm committing this nation, okay, to put a man on the moon by the end of this decade.
We didn't go to the moon to go to the moon. We went to the moon for a lot of other reasons. As Kennedy said, we choose to go because it is difficult, because it challenges us. And that, of course, is an important piece of the original motivation as to why you have frontiers and why you have settlements. Not to go somewhere, but for the way in which it transforms the people who go.
It was a reaffirmation as well of our nation as a nation of pioneers. It was a restatement that we are still the same people who sent Lewis and Clark west across the continent.
I took a trip through Africa in what was then Zaire, and is now Congo again, talking to some people who understood my baby French and could tell me a little bit about their impressions of America. And oddly enough, some of them would come out with this talk about 1969, 1969. They American, and they connected me with the moon flight. And there wasn't any of this sense that you might think of, oh my gosh, using resources for that instead of, you know, we poor people. To the contrary, it was pure, unadulterated wonder and appreciation of the grand voyage.
We live in a world now where virtually nothing can awe us. And I think absent that awe, you really are missing a dimension of, call it God, call it spirit, you're missing that. And I think that what Mars represents and interplanetary travel represents is an ability to sort of recapture that awe and live that awe that we have lost here on Earth and can't seem to recapture.
If the essence of exploration is to touch the boundary, the beach, the mountaintop, or the moon, the core of the human condition is the attempt to see the self in context. To stand on the moons of Saturn and see the Earth in perspective is to act out the unique identity of our species.
The Homo sapiens version of the human race lived for its first 150,000 years in Africa, and only about 50,000 years ago migrated out to take on the much more challenging environments of Ice Age Europe and Asia. And we had to develop techniques. We had to develop clothing and fire and houses and either ice fishing or big game hunting methods for obtaining food in the wintertime when it was not readily available. By transforming ourselves in this way, okay, we changed from an East African local curiosity into a global civilization. We became vastly richer in extent and in variety than we possibly could have had we remained in the Kenyan Rift Valley.
Over the next 30 years, NASA would keep manned missions in low Earth orbit with its space shuttle fleet and a small space station, and gave the privilege of going to other worlds to robots. Frustrated by NASA's lack of vision, engineer Robert Zubrin published The Case for Mars in 1996, outlining how humanity can create a permanent settlement on Mars within 10 years at just $40 billion. To create a network of scientists and other Mars enthusiasts, he founded the Mars Society in 1998, and for the past 8 years, thousands of participants from around the world come together annually to discuss why they need to make it happen. One of them is Mary Froba, a student from Austin, Texas.
Because we'll stunt ourselves if we don't. We dream so hard we have to keep going, and if we just don't, what's worth the dreaming? It's so important. If we just dream and then don't do it, it's just dreams. Laying down asleep with thoughts in the head. You gotta take those thoughts, you gotta do something about it. If we don't, we just try so hard and actually get to it and go. You gotta take those risks.
According to Wynne Wackhorst, author of The Dream of Spaceflight, some are willing to take such risks in order to, perhaps subconsciously, rediscover the security of childhood.
It's obviously a quest for meaning. What we mean by meaning is the kind of experience that we had in childhood. You're at the center of the universe, you're in this warm parental world. Everything seems like an extension of yourself, and you're at the center. As we mature, there's a process of individualization, and you need to separate from the parents, and you need to become independent and so on. But in the process, you lose that childhood innocence, and you become alienated and somewhat isolated. You know you can't go back, so maybe you can keep going out there and find it out there where unknown and known interface somewhere. The reality of things will somehow be in alignment with that child-centered universe.
I have to do this. Even if I don't, oh God, don't say that, but even if I am not chosen to be sent on the early Mars missions, I want to help advance it to happen. Someone has to go.
Right now, in this era in history, we're going to take the next leap. We're about to leave the planet and become spacefaring.
If it's natural for a child to mature and grow up, then perhaps it's natural for civilizations to grow up too and leave the parental world of Earth. Froba embraces such a possibility and would count a journey to Mars as a life achievement. Although Froba is not an astronaut, she is one of many young people lured by Mars and is currently studying geology in college and has recently enrolled in flight school. People like Froba are taking the first steps to help lead the way to Mars.
I would be so scared to be out of my mind, but I couldn't turn it down. If I turned down going to what feels like I hate to use the word destiny, but where I should be going. If I turn it down just because it's scary or harsh or risky, what have I accomplished?